Welcome. If you have brought a perfectly intact faith into this space today, if your theology is neatly filed away in boxes of certainties, or if you are looking for a quick, three-step formula to turn your disappointment into a breakthrough, I want to gently warn you that this hour may feel deeply uncomfortable. But if you are here because your knees are bruised from kneeling on a hardwood floor that felt like iron, if your throat is dry from a cry that seemed to ricochet off a ceiling of brass, and if in the deepest, most quiet hours of the night, you have looked at the wreckage of what you begged God to save and thought the one word you are never, ever allowed to say aloud in church, the word malice. If you have felt that the Almighty wasn't just silent, but that He was intentionally, systematically cruel, then pull up a chair, close the door, breathe. You do not have to pretend here. For the next 60 minutes, the masks are coming off. We are going to sit together in the dark, right at the edge of the paradox. Let's talk about the anatomy of the room you inhabit when a definitive no arrives. It has a very specific sensory profile, doesn't it? It is the smell of sterile hospital sheets after the heart monitor has gone flat, despite the 3-month prayer chain. It's the texture of the cardboard box you used to pack up your things from an office you gave 10 years of loyal, prayer-consecrated labor to, only to be dismissed without cause. It is the absolute suffocating weight of the silence in a nursery that remains empty after years of standing on promises, claiming scriptures, and anointing an empty crib with oil. The common religious scripts we have all been handed since childhood tell us how we are supposed to react to these moments. We are told to lift our hands in the storm. We are told that when God closes a door, He opens a window. We are told, with a patronizing pat on the shoulder, that He is just protecting you from something you can't see, or that His no's are just prep work for a greater yes. But let's be entirely honest with each other. When the thing you lost was good, when it was a child, a marriage, your sanity, or your livelihood, those pastel-colored cliches don't just fail to comfort, they feel like an insult. They create a profound psychological rupture. The mind begins to do a terrifying piece of math. If God is all-powerful, meaning He could have stopped this cancer, this betrayal, this bankruptcy, and if God is all-knowing, meaning He saw the exact depth of the agony this would cause my soul, and yet He actively chose to step back, fold His arms, and let the hammer fall, then how am I supposed to call that love? To an honest, wounded mind, that doesn't look like sovereignty. It looks like a calculated withdrawal of affection. It feels like malice. As a psychologist observing the human condition, I see what this structural collapse does to the nervous system. When a person experiences repeated, devastating divine refusals, they don't just get sad. They enter a state of chronic spiritual trauma. The sanctuary, the one place that was supposed to be a safe harbor from a brutal world, suddenly becomes the source of the threat. The brain cannot process a protector who allows you to be mauled. So to preserve its own survival, the psyche undergoes a process of profound dissociation. You keep showing up to the pews, you keep mouth-syncing the lyrics to the worship songs, but internally, a cold, thick sheet of ice forms over your heart. You stop asking for what you actually want because desire has become synonymous with danger. You realize that hoping is the fastest way to get hurt again. And as a historian looking back through the long dust-covered corridors of human spiritual expression, I see that this is not a modern malady. This is the oldest, most tightly guarded secret in human history. The institutional structures of religion have always tried to sanitize the records. They want to show you the neat icons, the saints with halos, the stories that end with a double portion of cattle and children. But if you blow the dust off the margins of the ancient manuscripts, if you look at the raw, unedited texts of antiquity, you find that the giants of the faith did not survive on a diet of cheap optimism. They were broken, highly dysfunctional, deeply traumatized human beings who spent years. To understand the true mechanics of a divine refusal, we have to perform an act of historical vandalism. We have to scrape away 3,000 years of church varnish, clean theological concepts, and the sweet, sanitized scent of candle wax. We have to look past the stained glass windows that render King David as a pristine porcelain saint holding a harp, and instead look at the jagged, unpolished limestone of Iron Age Jerusalem. Historians do not look at halos, we look at the dirt. We look at the political vulnerabilities, the psychological fractures, and the raw, unedited texts that religious institutions have spent centuries trying to domesticate. Let us read the primary text not as a devotional lyric, but as an ancient artifact of human agony. 2 Samuel 12:16-17. David therefore besought God for the child, and David fasted and went in and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose and stood beside him to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. To a modern reader, this sounds like a standard story of a pious man in intense prayer. But if you stand in the dust of 10th century BCE Palestine, this scene is a terrifying subversion of everything ancient society believed about God, power, and human survival. In the ancient Near East, a king was not merely a political executive. He was the cosmic linchpin between the heavens and the earth. If the crops failed, if the plagues came, or if the king's lineage was struck down, it was a public sign that the deity had withdrawn his favor. A sick royal child wasn't just a private medical tragedy, it was a devastating geopolitical crisis. It meant the gods were angry with the regime. It meant the shield over the nation had been broken. When David's court looked through the doorway and saw their supreme commander, the man who had decapitated Goliath, the warlord who had conquered the Jebusites, lying face down in his own sweat and domestic ash, they didn't see a model of intercessory prayer. They saw a monarchy on the verge of psychological and political self-destruction. They saw a man being systematically hunted by his own God. To understand the depth of this collision between the human will and divine finality, we must perform an autopsy on the original language of the text. The translations we read in our modern Bibles have been scrubbed clean. They use polite ecclesiastical terms that insulate our nervous systems from the raw violence of the original Hebrew. Let us dissect the first critical keyword, "Wibakesh vakesh." Our modern English versions translate this simply as "he besought" or "he pleaded with God." It sounds dignified. It sounds like a man kneeling neatly at an altar. But in the ancient Hebrew mind, the root verb bakash is not a polite religious request. It is a word of predatory intensity. Bakash is the word used when a hunter tracks down prey in the wilderness. It is the word used when an army searches a fallen city for survivors or hidden treasure. It implies a violent, straining, physical pursuit. When the text says David Vavakesh down in that dark room, it means he was hunting for God. He was trying to track down a deity who had intentionally gone into hiding. It is the psychological equivalent of a man tearing a house apart, lifting up the floorboards, screaming into the empty spaces, demanding that the God who promised him an everlasting dynasty show his face. David wasn't just praying. He was trying to physically lay hands on the garment of the Almighty and force him to halt the execution of his son. It is an expression of supreme, desperate entitlement clashing against absolute divine silence. The second keyword exposes the somatic bodily reality of this spiritual trauma. Vashakavarsa, Vashakavarsa. Modern translations say he lay all night upon the earth or lay on the ground. It sounds like David chose a hard bed for a few nights as an act of self-denial. But the Hebrew text is far more ominous. The word eretz, earth, does not just mean the topsoil outside your tent. In the ancient Semitic cosmos, eretz was a double entendre. It was the common word for the ground, yes, but it was also the technical term for the underworld. It was Sheol, the place of the dead, the realm of dust, shadow, and permanent separation from the living. When David throws his body arza, he isn't just adopting a prayer posture. He is performing a radical. When we look into the historical and psychological mirror of a divine refusal, we eventually realize that King David's week in the dirt was not an isolated incident. It was the activation of a tragic human archetype. There is a specific kind of person who is selected for this particular brand of suffering. It is the individual who has been given enough spiritual sensitivity to hear the voice of God, but whose life is subsequently defined by a crushing, unyielding barrier erected by that very same voice. They are the souls who are forced to carry a lifelong no while the rest of the world enjoys an effortless yes. Let us look deeper into this pattern. Let us look at how this ancient architecture of pain repeats itself, stretching its cold shadows from the parchment of ancient scriptures directly into the concrete apartments and glass offices of our modern lives. If David represents the explosive, acute shock of a sudden divine refusal, then the prophet Jeremiah represents the slow, chronic, decades-long claustrophobia of a life where God's primary mode of interaction is restriction. Consider the historical realism of Jeremiah's biography. He did not volunteer for his office. He was drafted from his mother's womb, a terrified, stuttering teenager who was promised by the Almighty that he would be made into an iron pillar and a fortified wall. But the historical reality of Jeremiah's life was an unbroken sequence of personal, emotional, and social denials. When Jeremiah wanted what every normal Jewish man in the 7th century BC desired, the warmth of a family, the comfort of a wife, the continuity of children, God stepped into his private life with a brutal, unyielding veto. In Jeremiah 16, the command drops like a blade. You shall not take a wife, nor shall you have sons or daughters in this place. Think about the psychological isolation of that mandate in an ancient tribal culture where a man's entire worth, legacy, and emotional safety net were tied to his lineage. God did not just deny him a family, he denied him humanity. He commanded Jeremiah to never enter a house where people were mourning, and to never enter a house where people were feasting. He was systematically excommunicated by divine decree from the collective emotional life of his own people. And for what? For a ministry that was mathematically guaranteed to fail. For 40 years, Jeremiah preached in the dust under the baking sun of Jerusalem, and not a single soul repented. He was beaten, put in the stocks, thrown into a subterranean cistern where he sank up to his waist in liquid mud, and left to starve. And what does this do to his view of God? It strips away every trace of liturgical politeness. Jeremiah doesn't write praise choruses about his trials. In Jeremiah chapter 20, the internal tension breaks through the prose in a terrifying scream of psychological trauma. He looks up at the sky and says, "O Lord, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. You are stronger than I, and you have prevailed. I am a laughingstock all the day. Everyone mocks me." The original Hebrew word he uses for deceived is pata. It is a graphic, violent legal term used to describe the seduction or enticement of a vulnerable person who cannot defend themselves. Jeremiah is looking at his creator and saying, "You lured me into a trap. You used your beauty and your promises to ambush my life, and then you locked me in a cage of refusals." Later, in the book of Lamentations, his language becomes even more raw, describing God not as a shepherd but as a predator. "He is a bear lying in wait for me, a lion in hiding. He has blocked my ways with blocks of stones. He has made my paths crooked." This is the biblical echo of the no that feels like malice. It is the terrifying realization that God can love a man, call a man, preserve a man's soul for eternity, and yet deliberately write tragedy, isolation, and psychological torment into the script of his earthly existence. Let us move from the ancient ruins of Jerusalem to a penthouse apartment in a modern metropolitan skyline. Meet Julian. To the public, Julian is the gold standard of Christian success. He is a celebrated intellectual, an author whose books on systematic theology sell hundreds of thousands of copies, and a speaker who fills auditoriums with his crisp, articulate defenses of the faith. He has wealth, prestige, and a flawless reputation for doctrinal precision. But if you sit in Julian's study at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the laptop is closed and the city below is dark, the sensory profile of his life is entirely different. The room smells of expensive leather and cold, untouched scotch. There is an absolute heavy stillness in the air. 15 years ago, Julian's only daughter, a brilliant, creative young girl who was the center of his universe, was diagnosed with an aggressive, degenerative neurological disease. Julian did what every devout father does. He deployed his immense faith. He organized global prayer networks. He fasted until his clothes hung loosely on his frame. He knelt by her bedside every night for 3 years, whispering the promises of God into her failing ears, claiming the healing stripes of Christ, and God said no. She died at the age of 11, her body twisted in pain. Julian did not leave the church. He did not become an atheist. His psychological survival mechanism was far more sophisticated. He built a theological fortress. He internalized the divine refusal by deadening his emotional core. He turned God into a complex mathematical equation, a cold sovereign entity to be analyzed rather than a person to be loved. When Julian stands on stage now, his words are brilliant, but they are mechanical. He can explain the doctrine of suffering flawlessly, but he cannot feel it. His marriage has cooled into a polite, silent business partnership. He has achieved everything the world calls success, but his internal altar is completely dark. He lives in a vacuum of cold efficiency, carrying a secret, frozen resentment toward a God who was powerful enough to save his little girl, but chose to let her rot. Julian is successful, but he is completely empty, a hollow monument to a prayer that died unanswered. Now let us drop down into a small, damp apartment on the suburban fringe. Meet Sarah. Sarah is 56 years old. Her life is a masterclass in domestic erosion. In her 20s, Sarah was a vibrant, deeply committed young woman who gave up her college career to care for her aging, missionary parents. She did so with joy, believing the religious narrative that if she sought first the kingdom of God and honored her parents, God would fulfill the deep, aching desire of her heart to find a godly husband, build a home, and raise children of her own. She prayed for a spouse for 30 years. She kept journals filled with specific prayers. She watched every single one of her peers walk down the aisle, attend baby showers, and build lives of shared intimacy. Sarah was left behind. The years bled away in a monotonous cycle of changing adult diapers, working a low-wage administrative job, and coming home to an empty kitchen. When her parents finally died, Sarah looked in the mirror and realized her youth was gone, her fertility was dead, and the silence of God had become permanent. Unlike Julian, Sarah didn't build an intellectual fortress. She weaponized her bitterness. Today, Sarah's life is a toxic husk. She still goes to church, but she sits in the back row, her arms folded, her eyes tracking every young couple with a sharp, predatory cynicism. She has become an architect of subtle sabotage within her community. When a young woman excitedly shares a testimony of how God provided a job or a relationship, Sarah is the one who drops the cold, passive-aggressive comment designed to deflate their joy. Online, she spends hours in anonymous forums, aggressively tearing down the testimonies of other believers, mocking ministries that preach about the goodness of God. The unanswered prayer did not just break Sarah's heart, it corrupted her character. Because she feels cheated by the Almighty, she believes she has earned the right to be cruel to His creatures. She is a living warning of what happens when a soul marinates in a divine refusal for a lifetime, without ever processing the grief. Why is it that when we read the ancient record of Jeremiah, we see a man who could scream at God, accuse him of malice, and yet remain a holy vessel, while our modern case studies, Julian and Sarah, end up either emotionally dead or morally ruined? The difference lies in a profound psychological and theological mutation that has occurred in the human consciousness over the last 3 centuries. Modern humans operate under the implicit myth of the therapeutic contract. We have been conditioned by a consumerist, technologically advanced culture to believe that life is a vending machine. If we input the correct tokens, morality, faith, prayer, and decent behavior, the universe must output personal safety, emotional fulfillment, and therapeutic wellness. We view God not as a terrifying cosmic sovereign, but as a celestial therapist whose primary job description is to maximize our self-actualization. Therefore, when a modern Christian like Julian or Sarah receives a catastrophic permanent no, their entire worldview collapses. The contract has been violated. Because they cannot process a God who operates outside of their therapeutic utility, they have only 2 options. They must either intellectualize him into a cold abstraction, like Julian, or turn against him in bitter, passive-aggressive rebellion, like Sarah. The ancient human, the archetype inhabited by Jeremiah and David, lived in a radically different psychological landscape. They had no illusions of control. They lived in an era of sudden plagues, violent invasions, and infant mortality. They did not view God through the lens of a commercial contract. They viewed him through the lens of an absolute, untamed covenant. In an ancient covenant, the sovereign king owed the servant nothing but his baseline decree. The servant, however, owed the king their entire existence. Jeremiah could scream at God. He could accuse him of being a deceptive predator because his relationship with the Almighty was raw, visceral, and completely real. He did not need God to be nice to believe he was God. He understood that the Creator is a consuming fire, unfathomable, dangerous, and utterly unyielding to human leverage. Ancient humans could hold the internal tension of a God who broke their hearts because they had a category for cosmic majesty. They understood that a divine refusal, even when it felt like malice to their fragile human nervous systems, did not absolve them of their submission to the throne. They allowed themselves to be broken by God without breaking away from him. We must ask ourselves which version of humanity we are going to emulate as we sit in our own dirt. Are we going to protect ourselves with the cold intellectual armor of Julian? Are we going to poison our environments with the sharp spite of Sarah? Or are we ready to learn the terrifying ancient language of Jeremiah and learn how to weep into the dust, knowing that the God who refuses us is still the only God who can hold us? Up until this exact moment, we have lived entirely inside the anatomy of the wall. We have explored the cold, unyielding boundaries of a divine refusal. We have smelled the ash, felt the dust, and validated the terrifying psychological reality that when God slams a door on something beautiful, it does not feel like protection. It feels like an execution. However, we cannot leave King David face down in the dirt of Jerusalem, because the historical chronicle contains a sudden, bizarre, and deeply jarring pivot. Look back at the ancient text. The moment the servants finally muster the courage to whisper that the child is dead, they brace themselves for David to completely fracture. They expect madness. They expect a violent escalation of his grief. But the text records a sequence of physical actions that defies all human logic. The text says, "Then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his apparel and came into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he came to his own house. And when he required, they set bread before him and he did eat." This is a psychological anomaly. For 7 days, while there was a sliver of hope, David was a madman in the dirt. The moment the no becomes absolute, permanent, and irreversible, he stands up. He washes the vomit and sweat from his beard. He puts on clean clothes. He walks directly into the sanctuary of the very God who just killed his son, and he bows. What happened in that room? Did David suddenly experience a magical wave of peace? Did he swallow his grief and adopt a posture of toxic compliance? No. As a historian and a psychologist tracking the depths of the soul, I tell you that David did not find a happy ending. He found something far more terrifying. He found the boundary line of a mystery that modern Christianity has completely forgotten. He realized that the no was not the absence of God. The no was the arrival of a different, undomesticated dimension of God. To understand this turning point, we have to introduce a rare, almost buried theological concept from the 16th century, a concept articulated by the reformers who were intimately acquainted with terror and exile. It is Martin Luther's doctrine of the opus alienum, the alien work of God. Luther argued that the creator of the universe operates in 2 distinct modes within the human biography. The first is his opus proprium, his proper work. This is the God we like. This is the God of the gospel tracts, the God of healing, of open doors, of supernatural restoration, of emotional warmth and immediate answers to prayer. But Luther warned that before God can perform his proper work, he is structurally obligated to perform his opus alienum, his alien work. The alien work is God's foreign, strange, and terrifying activity. It is the work of crushing, wounding, exposing, and saying an absolute devastating no to the human ego. In his alien work, God intentionally assumes the mask of an enemy. He wraps himself in thick darkness. He breaks your life. He allows the tragedy to land. And he systematically dismantles every psychological safety net you have built for yourself. And here is the critical pivot. To the human flesh, to the fragile human nervous system, the opus alienum looks, tastes, and feels exactly like pure, unadulterated malice. When you are in the teeth of the alien work, your theology cannot save you. It feels like God is a predator hunting you down. But the profound mystery of this concept is that the alien work is not an act of divine hatred. It is the violent clearing of the ground. God performs his strange, hostile work of destruction so that the false versions of our faith can be executed, leaving behind a soul that is finally stripped of its illusions. David stood up from the dirt because he realized the wrestling match was over. The hunter had caught the prey. God had executed his opus alienum. There was no longer any need to bargain, no longer any need to perform, no longer any need to manipulate the Almighty with tears. The no was final. And in that terrifying finality, David realized that the God who crushed him was still the only reality left in the universe. He didn't worship because he was happy. He worshiped because he had survived the collision with the untamed sovereignty of God, and he was still standing. Now, if you are listening to this audio deep dive, and you are currently sitting in your own week of dirt, I need to perform an immediate logic reset for your soul. We need to lift a crushing, invisible weight off your chest. I know what you have been telling yourself in the dark. You have been sitting in the wreckage of your unanswered prayer, your broken health, your empty arms, your shattered family, and you have been compounding your agony with a layer of intense spiritual guilt. You think to yourself, a real Christian wouldn't feel this angry. A mature believer wouldn't look at the sky and feel like God is being malicious. If I just had more faith, if I were stronger, I would be singing praises right now instead of feeling this cold, numb resentment. Listen to me very carefully. That guilt is a lie born of a sanitized therapeutic theology that does not belong in the real world. Your anger, your numbness, and your sense that God is being cruel are not signs that you are a bad Christian. They are signs that you are an authentic human being whose nervous system is reacting exactly the way it was designed to react when it encounters a catastrophic boundary. When your heart is broken by a divine refusal, your brain undergoes a profound state of shock. You cannot intellectually reconcile the Good Shepherd with the consuming fire that just let your valley turn to ash. To feel a sense of malice in that moment is not a sin. It is the natural, honest cry of a creature that has been wounded by its creator. The Bible does not condemn David for screaming into the dirt for 7 days. It does not condemn Jeremiah for calling God a deceptive bear lying in wait. God did not strike them down for their raw, bloody honesty. Why? Because God is not a fragile human narcissist who needs your polite compliments while your life is bleeding out. He is big enough to hold your rage. He is secure enough to endure your accusation of malice. Your spiritual numbness isn't a lack of faith. It is your soul's survival mechanism taking a necessary pause. It is the heavy blanket of winter falling over a garden that has been violently pruned. So hear this logic reset clearly. You are allowed to be devastated by his no. You are allowed to look at the closed door and weep for the beauty of what could have been. You do not have to fix your face for church this week. The turning point does not ask you to pretend that the pain is actually a secret blessing. It simply asks you to realize that you are currently inhabiting the space of the opus alienum. You are experiencing the strange, terrifying alien work of a God who is currently killing your illusions. And as we move forward into the final movements of this hour, we are going to look at how a human being survives this dark grace and how we begin to build a new kind of life on the other side of the divine veto. We have arrived at the edge of the desert. If you have traveled with us through this hour, your mind has been stripped of its cheap armor. You have looked at David face down in the ash. You have heard Jeremiah scream at the heavens. You have seen the cold, silent fortresses where modern souls hide when God says no. We have called the pain by its real name. We have allowed ourselves to feel the terrifying weight of the opus alienum, the strange hostile work of a sovereign who refuses to be managed. But now the clock turns. The Greek language has a word for what must happen next. It is a word that has been deeply corrupted by modern religious usage. We translate it as repentance, and we think it means feeling guilty, crying at an altar, or promising to be better. But the ancient word is metanoia. In its truest psychological and historical sense, metanoia means something far more radical. It means a total structural inversion of the mind. It is a profound neurological and spiritual rewrite. It is the moment the soul stops trying to escape the dark room and instead allows its eyes to adjust to the lightless space, discovering that the darkness isn't an empty void, it is a womb. When a permanent no lands in your life, your natural human instinct is to seek an exit. You want the desert to instantly become a garden. You want the wound to magically close without leaving a scar. But spiritual metanoia does not alter your external reality. It alters the architecture of your perception. It is the transition from fighting a God you think is malicious to submitting to a God whose love is too heavy for your ego to bear. To find the pathway through this transformation, we must step out of the Old Testament palace floors and walk into the midnight shadow of an olive grove. We must look at the ultimate New Testament pivot. Every year, millions of Christians read the account of the Garden of Gethsemane through the lens of a foregone conclusion. We know Sunday is coming, so we skip past the raw historical horror of Friday night. Let us look at Jesus of Nazareth not as a theological concept, but as a human being sitting in the absolute center of a psychological execution. The text in the Gospel says he began to be sorrowful and very heavy. The Greek text uses the word ademone, a word that implies a state of being completely overwhelmed by an isolated terror, a profound mental disorientation where the horizon disappears. He falls on his face, he replicates the exact somatic posture of David in the dirt, and he prays a prayer that is identical in its human desperation. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Consider the historical weight of this moment. This is the perfect Son. This is the only human being who lived in absolute, flawless alignment with the heart of the Father. If anyone had the relational leverage to demand a yes, it was him. If anyone's tears had the power to change the immutable decrees of heaven, it was the Messiah, he asked once. Silence. He asked twice, his sweat falling like great drops of blood clotted with agony. Silence. He asks a third time, begging for an alternative route, a different script, a loophole in the tragedy. And from the throne of the universe, the answer is a definitive, unyielding, cosmic no. The cup would not pass, the nails would be driven, the abandonment would be real. If God's refusals are a sign of his malice, then we are forced to conclude that God hated his own Son. If an unanswered prayer is proof that the Creator has abandoned his covenant, then the cross is a monument to divine cruelty. But the New Testament flips the script completely. The Lechalk of the book of Hebrews delivers a line that sends a cold shiver through our modern, therapeutic sensibilities. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Look at the paradox. The no was not an act of divine hostility, it was the supreme, terrifying instrument of cosmic redemption. The Father did not spare the Son, not because he was indifferent to his bloody sweat, but because the weight of the glory on the other side of that refusal was too vast to be negotiated away. This is where the logic reset becomes a spiritual reality. When you look at the cross, you are looking at a God who did not exempt himself from the agony of a divine veto. He took the heaviest no in human history into his own lungs, so that when you are drowning in your own unanswered cries, you can know with absolute certainty that your pain is not a sign of his displeasure. It is the very terrain where you are being conformed to the image of his Son. How do we translate this heavy theology into the practical day-to-day survival of our own souls? How do we stop the internal erosion that turned Julian into a hollow fortress and Sarah into a toxic husk? Metanoia requires us to move from passive suffering into active psychological cooperation with the dark grace of God. It requires 3 distinct, unhurried movements. The first step is the hardest because it feels like dying. It is the active, intentional decision to stop bargaining. When we are in the middle of a prolonged no, we spend an immense amount of psychological energy trying to maintain a siege against heaven. We think that if we just find the right scripture, fast one more day, or manifest enough faith, we can break the resistance of God. This constant spiritual striving keeps our nervous systems in a state of chronic, red alert hypervigilance. To practice metanoia, you must perform a physical and psychological act of resignation. I want you to visualize your unanswered prayer, that child who didn't come back, that chronic illness that won't lift, that relationship that died in the dirt. I want you to imagine yourself standing before the throne of God and slowly, deliberately opening your clenched fists. You are not saying, I understand why you did this. You are not saying, this doesn't hurt. You are simply saying, the siege is over. I stop demanding an explanation. I drop my weapons. I accept the finality of your decree. In psychology, we call this radical acceptance. In the language of the Spirit, it is called holy resignation. The moment your hands open, the energy required to maintain the anger begins to drain away, and for the first time in years, your soul can take a deep, unfiltered breath. The second movement is to enter the silence without trying to fix it. Our modern culture is terrified of the void. The moment God goes silent, or the moment a dream dies, we immediately try to fill the empty space with noise. We open social media apps, we plunge into frantic work, or we run to Christian subcultures that promise us an immediate restoration or a new season. We do anything to avoid the cold reality of the empty room. But the opus alienum requires you to sit in the void. You must learn to practice the discipline of undistracted grief. This means setting aside 15 minutes every day to sit in absolute silence. No music, no phones, no prayers, no religious cliches. You sit there and you let the darkness look at you. You let the feeling of the empty arms, the quiet house, or the broken body exist without trying to spin it into a positive testimony. You treat the silence not as a sign of God's absence, but as the shadow of his wings. It is in that undistracted void that the deep subterranean waters of the soul begin to rise. When you stop screaming for answers, your ears adjust to a lower, more profound frequency. The whisper of a God who does not offer you an explanation, but instead offers you himself as a companion in the dark. The final movement of spiritual metanoia is the integration of the wound into your new identity. Julian tried to erase his wound by turning into an intellectual machine. Sarah tried to deal with her wound by turning it into a poison arrow. Both of them failed because they refused to allow the no to change them. They wanted to remain the same people they were before the tragedy, just with an unanswered prayer attached to them. But a divine refusal is a systemic remodeling of the soul. You will never be the person you were before the hammer fell. That version of you is dead. Metanoia asks you to look at the scar left by God's veto, the empty space where your dream used to live, and treat it not as a site of shame, but as your primary credentials. In ancient cultures, a warrior was not respected for the pristine condition of his armor. He was respected for his scars. His scars were the historical proof that he had entered the teeth of the conflict, encountered an unyielding force, and survived the collision. When God says no to your deepest desire, he is giving you a scar that can become a source of profound, supernatural empathy for a broken world. A person who has never been broken by God can only offer cliches to a hurting soul. They can only hand out pastel-colored tracts and trite verses. But a person who has sat in the dirt for 7 days, who has felt the terrifying edge of the opus alienum, and who has chosen to rise, wash their face, and worship anyway, that person possesses a heavy, authoritative kind of comfort. When they sit next to a grieving parent, a broken divorcee, or a soul drowning in anxiety, they don't have to say a word. Their very presence creates a safe space, because their scars speak a language that the weary soul instantly recognizes. Let us close our eyes as this hour comes to an end. Let us picture the ultimate metaphor of the spiritual life given to us by the prophet Isaiah. He speaks of a God who makes rivers flow on barren heights and springs within the valleys. He speaks of a God who transforms the desert into pools of water and the parched ground into springs. Notice the geography of that promise. God does not move the traveler out of the desert. He does not fly them over the wasteland to a resort in the mountains. The miracle is that the water breaks out inside the very terrain that was killing them. The desert remains a desert, but its nature is fundamentally transformed from within. Your unanswered prayer is your desert. The permanent no you carry is your parched ground. Spiritual metanoia is the moment you stop begging for a helicopter to rescue you from this wilderness, and you instead strike the rock of your pain with the staff of honest surrender, watching as the deep, cool waters of the presence of Christ begin to bubble up through the cracks of your broken heart. You are safe here. The God who refused you has not forgotten you. He has capped your well of superficial happiness so that he can dig deeper into your soul, reaching the ancient, undumpable aquifer of his eternal joy. Wash your face, change your apparel, arise from the earth. The no is final, but the life that is born on the other side of that finality is unkillable. We have reached the final threshold of this hour. The historical records have been closed. The theological frameworks have been built and dismantled. The psychological maps have been laid out before you. But a content strategy for the soul cannot end in the intellect. If you leave this space with nothing but a set of new definitions, if you merely trade your old cliches for more sophisticated theological terms like the opus alienum, then we have failed. We must now turn the camera inward. We must descend the spiral staircase of your own interior architecture, down past the curated public persona, past the polite prayers you say in public, straight into the quiet cellar where your raw intuition lives. I am going to ask you a series of questions. I do not want you to answer them with your theology. I do not want you to answer them with what you should say. I want you to let these questions sit on your skin like cold rain. Let them pierce the marrow. We are going to inventory the dark corners of your heart, and we are going to do it with absolute, unblinking honesty. First, look closely at the ledger of your spiritual life. What is the exact unwritten contract you believe God violated when he said no? If you strip away the holy language, what did you secretly believe your morality, your service, your lifestyle, or your devotion had earned you? Second, look at the face of the deity you are currently angry at. When you look up at the sky and feel that God's refusal was an act of calculated malice, whose voice do you actually hear? Is it truly the creator of the universe? Or is it the echo of a critical father, an abandoning mother, a cold authority figure, or an abusive spiritual system that taught you that love is always performance-based and always conditional? Who are you actually projecting onto the throne? Third, examine the protective utility of your bitterness. How has your cold, numb resentment toward God functioned as a safe prison for your soul? If you keep God at a distance by labeling him as cruel, how does that protect you from ever having to risk vulnerability, desire, or hope again? Have you weaponized your disappointment to ensure that you never have to trust anyone, including the Almighty, with your heart ever again? Fourth, let us separate the grief from the rage. Are you truly angry at the sovereignty of God, or are you using anger as a psychological shield to avoid the terrifying, crushing weight of simple final sorrow? Is it easier to scream at the heavens and demand an explanation than it is to sit quietly in the wreckage and weep for the beautiful thing that is gone and is never coming back? Fifth, look at your own identity outside of the answered prayer. Who are you if you are not the person who gets that specific dream fulfilled? If you are not the successful professional, the healed person, the spouse, or the parent you begged to be, who is the you that is left in the dirt? Are you terrifyingly empty because your identity was actually rooted in the gift rather than the giver? Sixth, think back to your week in the dust, your season of desperate intercession. When you were fasting, weeping, and claiming promises, were you actually worshiping God as the Lord of your life? Or were you attempting to play God yourself? Were you trying to use your pain, your tears, and your spiritual performance as a form of holy blackmail to force the sovereign of the universe to sign off on your agenda? Seventh, look at the darkness that currently surrounds you. What if the silence of God isn't a punitive execution? What if the light was turned off not to abandon you, but because the surgery he is performing on your soul is so delicate and your ego is so hyper-vigilant that he had to anesthetize your certainties completely just to save your spirit from your own self-reliance? If you have allowed those questions to do their necessary surgical work, if you are sitting there stripped of your defenses, knowing that you have failed the test of perfect faith, I want you to lift your head. The opus elenum has done its work. The false contracts have been burned. The illusions of control have been laid in the grave. Now hear the voice of the Spirit speaking directly to the identity that can never be vetoed by a circumstance. Hear the ancient, unalterable affirmations of who you are in Christ, right here in the middle of your desert. You are not defined by the doors that God has slammed in your face. Your worth in the kingdom of heaven is not measured by the number of yeses you have accumulated on your resume of comfort. You are the explicitly chosen property of the Most High God, purchased not with an insurance policy of earthly ease, but with the blood of a son who also screamed into the midnight silence of a garden. When God said no to your dream, he did not revoke your adoption papers. He did not remove the royal signet ring from your finger. He did not erase your name from the palms of his hands. The refusal was not an act of excommunication. It was an invitation into the inner sanctum of his suffering fellowship. Hear this validation today. Your broken heart is not a sign of your spiritual bankruptcy. Your tears are not a metric of your unbelief. The fact that you are still listening to this voice, the fact that you haven't completely walked away from the courtyard of the Lord, despite the weight of the hammer that broke you, is the proof that there is a supernatural, unkillable seeds of divine fire locked inside your frozen marrow. You are hidden in Christ, and because you are hidden in him, your identity is completely safe from the volatility of this broken world. When your health fails, you are still whole in him. When your relationship dies, you are still perfectly known and desired by him. When your career collapses into ash, your eternal inheritance remains completely untouched in the vaults of heaven. Your scar is not your shame. It is your coronation. It is the proof that you have been counted worthy to carry the weight of a cosmic boundary. God has trusted your soul with a profound, heavy mystery. He has trusted you to hold his goodness while surviving his finality. It is time to leave the dark room. The 60 minutes are spent. You have looked into the abyss of the no that felt like malice, and you have discovered that on the other side of that terrifying cliff face, there isn't an enemy. There is only a sovereign whose love is sometimes too massive, too violent, and too eternal for our small, fragile expectations to comprehend. Do not try to force yourself to feel a sudden wave of joy today. Do not try to manufacture a fake testimony for the people in your life who need you to be okay so that they can feel comfortable. Just stand up, wash your face, anoint your head with the oil of your unalterable identity, and eat your bread. The desert is still out there, the door is still locked, the child is still gone, the body is still broken, but you are no longer the same person who entered this hour. You have been broken by God, but you have not broken away from him. And in the mystery of that dark grace, you are finally truly free. Go in peace. You are loved with an everlasting, untamed, and unyielding love. And he is holding you, even in the middle of the silence. We have reached the final shoreline of this journey. The arguments are finished. The text has been laid bare. There is one short, sharp verse that remains, a fragment of poetry pulled from the ancient book of Job. spoken by a man whose body was covered in ulcers and whose family lay buried beneath the ruins of a collapsed house. Job 13:15. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Look at the mechanics of that statement. The physical reality of Job's life was a sequence of mathematical destructions. His livestock were stolen, his children were crushed by a freak storm, and his health was completely eroded. The objective data of his existence pointed to a universe that was actively hostile. You know what it feels like to live inside that data. You know the exact sensory profile of sitting on the edge of your bed, looking at your hands, and feeling that the Creator is systematically dismantling your life piece by piece, leaving you raw, exposed, and spiritually exhausted. Yet, the eternal reality hidden beneath the ash is that when God slays your expectations, He is not destroying you. He is executing the false contract you made with Him, clearing the wreckage so that an unshakable, indestructible hope can be anchored into His bare sovereignty. If God never explains the reason behind the no for the rest of your earthly life, will you still allow Him to hold your soul? If you are ready, don't close your eyes to hide. Keep them open. Look at the scars on your hands. And if you have the breath for it, let these words become the honest currency of your Father, or whoever you are in this thick darkness. I am here. I am back in the dirt. The door is shut. The medical report did not change. The person did not return. The clock has run out, and the reality of my loss is absolute, unchangeable, and permanently locked into my history. My throat is dry from the years I spent begging you for a yes. My chest feels physically hollow because it feels like you watched my heart break, wrapped yourself in silence, and let the hammer fall anyway. It felt like malice. It still feels like malice. What if your anger at Him is actually the proof that you still believe He is there? But today, I am too tired to keep fighting the wall. You are the Creator, and I am the clay. You do not owe me an explanation. You do not sign my contracts, and you refuse to be managed by my tears, so I stop the siege. I open my hands in this dark room. I lay down the weapons of my bitter resentment, my intellectual armor, and my passive-aggressive cynicism. I allow myself to simply feel the raw, unmitigated tragedy of this loss without trying to fix it with a cliche. I recognize now that your no was the arrival of your opus alienum, your strange, terrifying alien work. You broke my beautiful idol so that my soul could not find its rest in anything less than you. You allowed the fire to consume my valley so that I would be forced to discover the deep, subterranean springs of your unkillable life. Are you ready to let the version of you that required a yes die, so that the person who can survive the no can be born? I don't understand your ways. I don't like this script, but I choose to rise from this earth. I choose to wash my face. I choose to believe that the hands that crush me are the only hands large enough to hold the pieces of my broken spirit. In the name of the Son who drank the ultimate cup of refusal. Stay here for a moment. Do not rush back into the noise of the world. Let the water wash over the clay. Let the silence become your sanctuary.